All right, Chelsea fans, we're back. This time a different setting. We were pitch side earlier doing some work, but now we're up here at the stadium with David Barnard, club secretary, to continue our 1000th episode. Dan, we've got, again, very lucky to be able to speak to him, and we've got some great questions to kind of bring a little more insight into the club as a whole.
Well, first off, thanks for taking the time to speak with us, David, and giving us an opportunity to chat with you here on the fourth floor of Stamford Bridge in the organizational end of it, a little bit off the football pitch, which is where a lot of your work is really, again, I think you refer to it as you play in the midfield. You're kind of working the ball back and forth between everybody. But maybe for those who don't know, like what is your role been? What is your history with the club? Because it is a very long and tenured kind of history that you have with Chelsea.
Okay, well, obviously my role is I'm also sort of director of football operations, which is a title that's sort of evolved from the normal club secretary role, because as the club's got bigger and obviously playing in Europe, playing on world tours, my responsibility has increased over the years. As the club secretary role, which is like the football administration role, then I'm responsible for everything to do with the legislations regarding FIFA, UEFA, the Premier League, the FA, EFL. All that sort of comes under my umbrella, and there's obviously I've got to ensure that the club is in line with all those rules and regulations. And then from my operational side, then I'm responsible obviously for all the fixtures, whether they be domestic, whether they be in Europe, or whether it be on tour. And obviously being at Chelsea in the recent years, we've added the FIFA World Club Championship, Champions League finals. I think I've probably been responsible for the full operation of probably 35 major finals since we've been here.
Do you think anyone has broken that record in terms of compared to your record of kind of overseeing that many finals?
No, at the moment, I'm probably the only person that's done that. And at least in 21 of those, we've been victorious, which makes the job worthwhile at the end. Although when those finals are taking place and you're responsible for the operation, you don't actually enjoy them because there's still work to do post-match. And it's only when you come the next day, the realization that you've won a trophy, that they then do open the bottle, shall we say.
That is a lot, which is exciting. And I think we'll definitely kind of get into some of those. But yeah, you'd mentioned you've been with the club almost 21 years. Obviously been in football management and operations for much longer than that. It's kind of an interesting story of how you got to Chelsea. But I guess like now that you've been here so long, things have evolved quite interestingly enough. And as we look at transfers, I think in general, because, fans love a good transfer and a good transfer story. How has that kind of evolved over the 2 decades of transfers?
I suppose I can give you a prime example. Is you take Ida Johnson, who came from Bolton Wanderers for $6 million at the time. Now, the actual transfer paperwork consisted of an A4 piece of paper. On the front was the transfer fee, and on the back were the signatures. But now you look at a transfer fee now, and it would be something like 25 to 30 pages long, all drafted by lawyers from both sides. So what was just quite a simple transaction now takes a hell of a long time to negotiate, and it's basically the lawyers rather than the football administrators, I would sort of say.
Oh, I mean, a lot of extra reading, to say the least. I'm sure with the agents, Dan, right? I'm sure that they're making things a little bit more complicated.
I guess from your perspective and that evolution of the contract and the way that it's put together, how do you view into that in terms of like the speed of being able to get a deal done? Because obviously on one sheet of A4 paper with signatures on the back sounds like it's a 30-second conversation.
Well, put it this way, in my early days when there was no computers to start with, is that we'd end up with a typewriter, which is a piece of carbonated paper, so that you could get as many copies as you can, and you'd have to type them. And if you needed, like for instance, 4 copies of the contract, your typewriter would only take 2 at a time. So you had to type the contract out twice, as opposed to doing it now once on a computer. And one of the things just recently, which has come out of the pandemic, is something called DocuSign. Mm-hmm. Now, DocuSign was never recognized prior to the pandemic. And what that's done now is whereas you're running around faxing, like the old fax machines, etc., now you can actually sign documents on your phone. I've been just recently during the window, I was actually traveling in the car and I was able to sign the documents on my phone sitting in the passenger seat of a car. Whereas before I used to have to be physically obtain the signatures of people wherever they were. And I think you asked me, can I relate to a transfer? And probably the best one where I can give you an example of where we actually needed signatures, that we were playing in the Premier League Asia Cup in Hong Kong. But prior to arriving in Hong Kong, we played in Malaysia and Thailand, 2 particular friendly games. And at the time, AVB was the manager, and he wanted to sign Oriol Romeo from Barcelona, who was playing in their B team. Now, the negotiations started while I was in Malaysia. It then continued while I was in Thailand. Now, you've got to also bear in mind the time difference, why things were taking so long. Then completed the transaction in Hong Kong. The end of the tour, I flew back to Heathrow on the Sunday, and then went into the office on Monday, put all the paperwork, because it had to be physical paperwork. I put all the paperwork in place in the office on the Monday. Then I flew out to Madrid on the Monday because Oriol was playing in the Under-20 World Cup for Spain out in Colombia. I then had to fly to Bogota, and that was an interesting one because when I got to Bogota, I got picked up because fortunately we were sponsored by Adidas at the time, so they were involved in the World Cup. So they were helping my sort of travel arrangement. I got to Bogota. As I got to the hotel, there was 2 armed guards outside. I thought, this is interesting. I literally had to carry from here to the end of this room, but they carried my bag, escorted me into the hotel. I then got into the hotel and I said I've got to catch a flight in the morning to go to Menez, which is obviously in the Andes somewhere where the World Cup was being played. And I went into my room and they asked me would I like to come down to the restaurant. But I laid there and I put the television on, and the first thing I saw in television was a truckload of bodies on a bridge, and all the bodies were then being thrown into the water. So the first thing I did was get the chair, put it up against my hotel room, and rather than have a meal, I ended up eating all the M&Ms and everything out of the fridge. That was my meal. And then, of course, apparently then a resident band played in the restaurant, kept me awake all night. And eventually, when I went down in the morning to catch this other plane, I said to them, look, I need to get to the airport. It should have been booked, but the guy never turned up. So they said to me, well, first of all, we'll take you, but we'll put you in the back of the car, blacked out windows because you've got pale skin. And the last thing that happened is that whatever traffic lights you were going to stop at, you'll be, So I'm loving this. I'm really looking forward to this transfer. So eventually when I got on the plane and I flew through around the Andes, come around this mountainside, and it was just this plateau, this city. And Adidas put me in the same hotel, lucky enough, with the Spanish national team. So the player was there. And then the first person I walked in was the president of the Spanish FOA, who knows me, and then started questioning what I was doing there. And they wouldn't let me see the player. And then eventually, because I knew him, I said, look, I'll be in an hour, we do the paperwork, and I'll be out of your hair. So the president allowed me to sign Romeo. And I got all the paperwork, and I stayed to watch his game, and it was a double-header game. So I watched the game, and then I said, right, I'll go back to the hotel. They said, there's no way you're leaving this stadium. You're going to have to sit and wait for the other game because we'll have to take you back to the hotel. It was obviously not safe. So eventually I got home, so then flew to Bogota to Madrid, then back to London with all the paperwork intact, all signed. So that transfer started in Thailand and Malaysia and ended up via that. So that's probably one of the longest transfers I've ever been involved in. And, I got on very well with Romelu, and even though he didn't make it at Chelsea, at least he made a great living at Southampton. And every time he went to Southampton, he was a lovely fella. So I got enjoyment out of the final outcome, but obviously to actually get those physically. But now I wouldn't have had to go to Bogota. I would have just done DocuSign. So that's one of the main things, if I can give you an example of the difference between how you used to do a transfer.
I mean, that's obviously a wild story, multi-continent, juggling all these different pieces. And, just now, like you said, you can just electronically swing one over and be done with it. But you picked an interesting time apparently to go to Colombia over a single player's transfer. Yes. I mean, would you have like a team? So like you're in Colombia, someone else is like in Germany and someone's in Italy or whatever it is? Or were you the guy that had to go everywhere?
I was the guy that had to go anywhere in those days. Yes.
Wow.
That's fortunate enough they gave me a sort of not a bodyguard, but someone that looked after me. He was a massive guy. He looked like an Indian, long hair, and I've stayed friends ever since. And he's actually come across to say thank you. I've invited him to a Chelsea game when he was in England. So you do actually get the benefit of actually meeting new people and striking up friendships. And if you ever give a situation in another, you've always got someone you can call upon. So you do make a lot of friends in this game.
With all the travel that you've had, one of the places that Chelsea has made a little bit more recent history, the time that we've been doing this podcast over 9 years, is coming to the U.S. And there's been the growth of the U.S. Chelsea supporter. You've had a chance to be on several U.S. tours. How have you seen the fandom in the U.S. kind of grow and evolve over that time?
Oh, it's grown incredibly. I remember going, there must have been about 2004. We went on tour. We went to Seattle, trained at Seattle and Pittsburgh. And at the time, I think we were getting crowds of about 25,000, 30,000. Now, that's so much as what we built up in the US with the supporters clubs and everything. And now we go back to the States and we're playing in front of 60,000. And then it's not, because one of the things that we wanted to do is when we went to the States is to establish the club, the brand and everything else. And by bringing with us people like the foundation and setting up the soccer camps. Because what we wanted to do, we wanted to leave a legacy in the cities that we've been to. Because a lot of clubs at the time, Barcelona, Real Madrid, they were just coming over for the money, playing the game and disappearing. But that's why we set up training camps and being in cities, because we wanted to establish ourselves and leave some form of legacy that when we left, everybody still continued to remember Chelsea Football Club, not just a visiting team that come in and played a game and went. And I think our foundation have done really, really well in their role, helping establish the clubs within the States. As I say, every time we've gone there, and just a little fact is that first of all, we went to Pittsburgh. That particular year, they won the Super Bowl after we'd been there, used their training facilities. We then went to Seattle. The same year that we went and trained that summer, Seattle Seahawks won the Super Bowl. And then we went to Philadelphia and stayed in Philadelphia Eagles, where we're possibly saying this year, they won the Super Bowl. So we've been to the States, used 3 NFL training grounds, and each one of those has won the Super Bowl afterwards. So they must have learned something from us, surely.
I know at this point, you're going to be getting offers from NFL teams to host Chelsea at their training facility.
Absolutely. It's but again, the one thing from a football perspective, I'm not the marketing man, I'm not the commercial man, I'm the football man. And I've got one of the things that when we go on pre-season, we have to ensure that it's preparation for the Premier League. So that, and then all the commercial and everything, we then try and bolt on around it to make sure. And we try to find the best training facilities when we go to the various cities. And that's when the NFL training facilities, you can't get better than some of those facilities. Yeah. Unfortunately, when I get back, the medical department are putting a request for bits of equipment they've seen in the States, which then ends up costing us money. But as I say, it's preparation for the Premier League in the first instance, and then what we can do as much as we can do around it to obviously generate the name of Chelsea. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite project that the foundation has been able to do as a part of those U.S. tours? I mean, we've had a chance to see like a lot of the Say No to Hate and the anti-Semitism campaigns, the things that the foundation have done. We've seen the work with the kind of individual soccer camps too. But is there one that sticks out in your mind as a very favorite project?
Not so much a favourite, because I can't have favourites really. To be able, every one of them has been good for the club, and if it's good for the club, then it's great. Yeah, I remember when I was in New York, going up to Harlem and seeing everything that was going on up there, for example.
Yeah, because there's the youth clubs up there that Chelsea work with. Yeah, that's really cool. And we've seen a lot. I think of to what Chelsea playing Real Madrid in the big house in Michigan, 110,000 people. I mean, the crowds are just spectacular. So it's got, it's great to see. Obviously, you're in the United States last summer, and we're essentially in 3 NFL stadiums. I mean, Camping World might as well be at that level, but it's just really cool to see the game grow. And obviously, it's a lot of hard work behind the scenes you guys have done. Talking about transfers, I guess we always love a good story, and obviously the Oriol Romeu one was crazy. It was wild. But favorite kind of transfers over the 21 years? I mean, they've evolved so much and things like that. But Any other kind of like wild stories?
Not so much wild. I think when you sign a player, you may or may not be taking a gamble, but when you actually sign that player and then they actually work out for the club, then you get the satisfaction. That's one of our best transfers, signing that particular player. If it's not a world beater at the time or someone that was a reasonable fee and then goes on to become that player, that's when you get more, I was involved in his transfer at the time. Because in my career, I probably signed, including contracts and transfers, I'd lost count after 3,000, so I know I've been involved with contracts and transfer agreements now for all my career.
Yeah. And it's probably got to be, I guess, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Is it extra special when you're signing that academy graduate from Cobham to the kind of a first team deal?
Well, in fact, this season is actually probably another unique situation for probably myself and anybody really, is that Leo Castledine, who is one of our scholars, is now a pro.
Just scored a winner against Arsenal.
Against Arsenal. I signed him, obviously, as a scholar and signed his first professional contract. But the picture that we took was with his father, because when I was at my previous club, Wimbledon, I actually signed him as a scholar and signed him on his first professional contract. So we had a picture that I was actually with the father and son, both had signed the scholarships and both signed their first professional contracts.
Generational.
So I think that's one of the first times it's ever happened. So for an administrator like myself to be in that position, and both my signature was on their contracts. So for me, that was a good little piece of history for me.
Wow. As you kind of think about looking maybe like ahead as to like what, are the things that like you want to kind of, continue to accomplish and continue to do within like your role and your capacity? Are there things that excite you in terms of like what comes next within your role, or kind of as you continue to expand scope?
Well, I think in this particular sport is you can look back on what we've achieved in my role and the success that we've had. But that is yesterday's fish and chip paper. You always got to move forward. You'll forget the past, continue, and hopefully you can carry on fulfilling the success that the club's had since I've been here. Mm-hmm. And that's my ambition. So I just get excited every time, every game. You get excited, even though you say I've worn the T-shirt. To be honest, I'm privileged, apart from working for Chelsea, but being in that position where I've been responsible for the operation of a World Club Championship, European Champions League, Europa Cup, FA Cup, League Cup, Community Shield. And I'm suddenly realised I've had that opportunity that no other people have experienced. But I still get that buzz. I still get that same feeling with the next one. And you're still out to want to win the next one. Obviously, last year, during the sanctions, we got the 2 domestic cup finals. And I was just as gutted for losing those cup finals. Even though I'd won them previously, you just still got that feeling. You feel as disappointed, not just for myself, but disappointed for everybody who's put the effort into it to get into those finals. And in those 2 finals in particular, when we were under government sanctions, when it was sort of difficult, you couldn't even buy a box of tea bags without getting government approval, but you had to have a whole operation under restrictions. And for the staff and everybody that worked under those restrictions to even get to 2 domestic finals was fantastic. Mm-hmm. It was an interesting year last year when people say, look back on 22. We started the year in Abu Dhabi. We're suddenly world champions. And then unfortunately we had the war situation when then in government sanctions under 2 domestic cup finals, we then ended up under new ownership. Mm-hmm. And then some of our players then had the added high again of being selected for their countries for the World Cup. So the training ground, everybody involved at training ground, it was an unbelievable deal. I don't think anybody else has experienced that. Mm-hmm. But we're still here. We're still here kicking a ball. So we must have done something right during that period of time.
Yeah, no, so true. Well, like I said, yeah, it's been a lot. I mean, at this point, you're probably like, there's nothing left that can surprise me, but I think we all say that, and there will be something.
There
right?
definitely will be. There's something about football that there's something always around the corner that you don't expect.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else?
No, we just want to thank you so much for the time to spend with us, for the stewardship that you've had of the club, and continuing to sign all those contracts and bring us players, which in turn have brought us, as fans, great success to watch from at home or when we're here at the Bridge. So we're very appreciative for the work that you and everybody do.
It's a pleasure, and it's a pleasure to actually work for the club. And because I only look upon myself, although I'm a board member, I only look at myself as a custodian or guardian of your football club. And, I wish you every success with your podcast. And I hope may continue.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Yeah, and we're, again, love all the effort we get, on the summer tours and stuff. It's really cool, especially when it comes to our backyard. We just know, is speaking for fans abroad as at large, anytime Chelsea goes to the different countries, it does mean a lot to the local fans. So again, thanks for setting those up. But again, David, appreciate all the time. That's it for us. Again, episode 1000. A lot of really cool information coming at you guys. Hope you've enjoyed it.
Right, my pleasure.
Good. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.